Well, of course, we've missed a couple of days of story reading because of VE Day, which took us all away. Victory in Europe, which was actually the war, or part of the war, that Tien Pao is in, except VE means victory in Europe, but not in Japan and China. There it went on still further, and we're going to rejoin Tien Pao as his adventure continues, if adventure is the right word. Let's have a look. You'll remember not long ago he was with the gorillas, the Chinese gorillas in the mountains, and that was the gorilla's young wife with the same name as Tien Pao's mother, Yin, if I remember right. And then he travelled on with the gorilla, but then the gorilla left him, had to leave him, and he went on to a burning city or town, the town of terror, which was filled with poor Chinese people running down the streets trying to carry their belongings out of the town to safety. Some getting on trains, packed onto trains on the roof and everywhere. And there was people like this woman trying to steal Glory of the Republic. Tien Pao managed to escape and rescue Glory of the Republic, and Tien Pao managed to get on a train, and a soldier threw him up through a doorway onto the packed train and put Tien Pao and Glory of the Republic in the big straw basket, the deep straw basket, to try and keep them safe. And so we're moving on. Chapter 7. And this chapter is called The House of 60 Fathers, because I think by the end of this chapter he might have finally reached the House of 60 Fathers, although that's still not quite the end of the story. So, there was no support in the open doorway of the rolling train. In the night, the soldier, making room for himself, squatted down, squeezed the tall basket tightly between his knees, and placed both hands in a hard grip on the rim of the basket. In the basket, Tien Pao had fallen asleep in a queer, uncomfortable position. His legs straddled Glory of the Republic. His hands were on the little pig's head. He was almost sitting on the little pig. Glory of the Republic squirmed and wriggled. In the deep dark of night, before the dawn, the train swayed and rocked as it leaned round the tight curve of a mountain. In the rocking doorway, the basket teetered. The soldier's head nodded for a moment. His hands relaxed their hold on the rim of the basket. The train leaned around the curve. The basket leaned, squeezed from between the sleeping soldier's knees, leaned still farther, and fell. Somehow as it fell, it righted itself with the weight in its bottom. It fell flat on its bottom beside the speeding train. It bounced up, toppled over. It flung Tien Pao out. Besides the pounding wheels of the train. Later the jumping basket spilled out Glory of the Republic. It rolled away. Something under the train caught it. the basket and dragged it along. In the doorway the soldier woke up with a start. The basket was not in the doorway. There was a black mountain, and there was the night. The mountain echoed to the rolling of the train, but the mountain also beat back the sounds of a basket being shredded to pieces under the train. Not a muscle moved in the soldier's face as he stared down at the beating wheels, and then he shrugged and turned his head away. The stunned T.M. Powell crawled beside the train in the black darkness. He rolled himself away from the thundering wheels of the speeding train before he actually knew what had happened. Then he remembered the basket. The basket was gone. The train had gone around the bend. Even the sound of the train was gone. But T.M. Powell still crawled beside the track. And as he crawled, he placed his hand on the shredded bottom of the basket. He held the piece up to his eyes, staring at it, uncomprehending, unbelieving. A confused grunt came from out of a deep ditch beside the track. T.M. Powell flung the piece of basket from him and dived headfirst into the black ditch. There at its narrow bottom lay Glory of the Republic, on his back, legs kicking the air. He was caught upside down in the narrow ditch. There at its narrow bottom lay Glory of the Republic. T.M. Powell grabbed him and held him. He hugged and squeezed the upside down, kicking, grunting pig. Suddenly T.M. Powell pinched Glory of the Republic's snout tightly shut. He heard voices. The night wasn't quiet anymore. Sounds of voices came down the track. Dim, dark shapes came stumbling along over the railroad ties. T.M. Powell slid down flat with the little pig in the dark ditch bottom. More voices sounded. A mass of people came slowly around the bend. They struggled along under the weight of their belongings. These must be the poor who had evacuated Hengyang on foot when the first cannon had begun to thunder. They must have been walking for days. To get this far, they trudged by, women holding babies, stooped by under the load of their household goods. Older children lugged younger children along. Some of the men were carrying an old father or mother piggyback, and to the backs of the old ones high towering bundles had been strapped. They struggled by. The night became alive with their voices. In a way it was good to lie at the bottom of the ditch listening to the many voices, to hear women and children talk out, their voices not hushed with fear. It meant that the Japanese had not yet reached this part of the country. But that meant that now at last he too was free. Free! The sudden thought overwhelmed T.M. Powell. He was free. He almost wanted to run to the people, yell it at them. He was alive and free. He almost wanted to run to the people, yell it at them. He was alive and free. The Japanese had not got him. He did not go. He stayed flat in the ditch. For among the voices, he also heard children's voices in the dark. Children whimpering to their mothers for food. They would seize Glory of the Republic. He was food. And even if little children wept from hunger in the night, Glory of the Republic too had to be free, alive and free. The day was beginning to dawn. The first faint grey was beginning to streak the sky. and long before daylight really came, somebody in the endless stream of marching people would for no reason stumble to the edge of the ditch and discover him and Glory of the Republic. Tien Pao looked up at the mountainous high rock looming up beyond the ditch. These were his own people, but he couldn't stay in the ditch, nor follow the railroad track with them. For the sake of Glory of the Republic, he would once more have to take to the mountains. When for the moment there were no voices above him on the track, Tien Pao crept noiselessly up the far side of the ditch, hugging the deep shadows of the towering rock. He crept around the huge, sprawling, rock-strewn base until it was between him and the railroad track. The tall rock was between him and the railroad track. In the darkness, Tien Pao peered up at the tall, sombre rock. He poked about for a path. There did not seem to be a path, but he could not stay down below if he did not, and he did not dare wander farther along or from the railroad track. If he started to wander in this unknown country, he might blunder and circle back to the Japanese lines. The railroad track had to be his guide. It was the only thing to give him some sense of direction. He would have to follow it, the way he had followed the river. He'd hide on top of the rock and wait until the stream of people had passed, and then he'd set off down the track by himself, wherever it led him. It struck Tien Pao that it might be better if there was no path up this sheer, steep rock. Hungry people did not climb useless, pathless rocks. But if he could somehow climb it, then he would be safe all day. He'd be looking down on the people, but they wouldn't be able to see him. Then a thought hit Tien Pao so hard it all but rocked him. It unnerved him. But it could just possibly be, his father and mother might easily be among these homeless wanderers on the track. Yes, it could be. He had reached this point in one night on the train, but these people on foot must have walked days and nights to get this far. These must be some of the first refugees from Hengyang. It could be. They could be among them. If the guerrilla chief had been right when he said that a father would wait and a mother would not leave until the Japanese bayonets were at her back, why then his father and mother would not even be among these first refugees. They would still be coming, and from the top of this high rock he could watch for them all day. Almost frantic now to get to the top, to watch the tracks for his father and mother, Tien Pao began the struggle up the almost sheer wall of rock. He dragged Glory of the Republic up after him by the rope. He wouldn't give up and he wouldn't stop, no matter how much the little pig dragged and struggled against the impossible ascent. Tien Pao fought on, had to fight on, for other thoughts were crowding in among those first hopeful thoughts. He couldn't let himself think these other thoughts, that his father and mother might have gone by some other road. There must be other roads out of Hengyang. That there was hardly a chance that they'd just happened to come down this particular track. He had to get up there and watch and watch. What else was there? If he did not find them, he was not alive and free. He was lost and homeless. Suppose tonight he did climb down and follow the railroad track. Where would he go? Where in all China would he go? Where in all China was he to find his father and mother? And then what would become of him? Lost, homeless, starving, lost. He had to climb. He had to watch, and they had to come down the railroad track. There was no other hope. At last Tien Pao pulled himself and Glory of the Republic over the top of the towering crag. He was spent. Trembling with exhaustion and hunger, he stretched flat and peered down at the railroad track.
It was strange. He could hear the constant mutter of their voices, but he could not seem to see the people down below. Dazed with weariness, sick with hunger, he lay staring down, but everything was spotty. Everything danced. Big black ballooning spots floated between him and the people on the railroad track. They closed in. He could not see through them. It had taken so long to climb. The sun was already hot on his back. Tien Pao closed his eyes to clear them of the dancing and the lilting and the spots. The warmth of the sun on the tall rock stole over Tien Pao, and he fell sound asleep. Glory of the Republic rooted among the sparse grass and weeds, but then the tired pig cuddled down beside Tien Pao. In his sleep, Tien Pao threw a protective arm over his little pig, and together they slept their exhausted sleep. Down below, the voices in the endless procession of the homeless along the railroad track muttered on and on. Tien Pao slept on. Sunshine spilled over the great rock. The evening sunshine lay warm against the face of the rock. Tien Pao awoke. In the evening hush, a bugle had called. It called again. One bugle called from somewhere far away, but the fantastic rock on which Tien Pao lay took up the call and cast it back, like an echo. It was as if bugles sang everywhere. But a bugle? Soldiers? The Japanese? But then Tien Pao let himself sink sweetly back as he remembered that he was in free country. These couldn't be Japanese. The bugle call must come from some Chinese barracks. Tien Pao wasn't fully awake yet. He stretched, rolled over on his back and looked at the sun. He struggled to arrange his sleepy thoughts. The sun was still rising. He hadn't slept too long. Now he must go and watch the railroad track for his father and mother and the baby sister. Once more Tien Pao stretched himself and yawned. He still felt warm and soft and confused. He looked at the sun again, but the sun was wrong. The morning sun had been behind the rock when he had climbed, but this sun shone from across the railroad track. He couldn't believe it. He reached out to shake the sleeping pig awake. Beyond the pig stood shoes. Two pairs of feet in heavy shoes. In one scared jump, Tien Pao grabbed Glory of the Republic and was up and away on a stumbling run. In his confusion, he would have run headlong over the edge of the cliff, but a hand reached out and grabbed him. Tien Pao twisted in the man's grip. But he was white. Both men were white. They were soldiers. American soldiers. Tien Pao let himself droop and hang in the soldier's hold. He was limp with relief. You spoiled it," one of the Americans said to him. He tapped a small black box he held in his hand and looked disgusted. Tien Pao did not know what he had said. He did not know that the little black box was a camera, and that the soldiers had gone to the trouble of climbing the fantastic rock to take a picture.
On top of the rock they had come upon a Chinese boy cuddled around a pig. Both sound asleep. It had been too good to miss. The soldiers made a lot of motions, grinned a lot, and at last Tien Pao understood that he was supposed to lie down again and snuggle up to Glory of the Republic. He did what they wanted, but he nervously watched from under his eyelids for some explosion or red flash to come flaming out of the box the soldier was pointing at him. Nothing happened. The other soldier set Tien Pao back on his feet. It was all over. Nothing had happened. Tien Pao stood bewildered, but both soldiers now seemed very pleased. They patted Tien Pao's head, and one reached into his pocket and gave Tien Pao a wafer-thin slice of candy. A wafer-thin slice of candy? The thin strip of candy was wrapped in green paper, with another wrapper of silver paper underneath the green. It puzzled Tien Pao. This surely must be extra wonderful candy if the Americans had taken such pains to wrap so small a piece so thoroughly. And Tien Pao put the candy in his mouth. It lay sweet and thin on his tongue, but it did not begin to melt at all. He took it out again to look at it, turned it over. It stuck to all his fingers. Tien Pao stuck his fingers in his mouth to tear the candy off with his teeth. But the moment it was in his mouth, it did not stick at all. The two soldiers were laughing. They pointed to their teeth and made chewing motions. Tien Pao began to chew. He chewed and chewed, but the stuff simply would not chew away. At last Tien Pao gulped and swallowed it. He rubbed his stomach to show the friendly soldiers how good it had been. They roared with laughter. Tien Pao did not laugh. One of the soldiers looked at a watch bound to his wrist. He spoke quick words to the other soldier, and then they hastily strode away across the cliff and started to descend on the railroad side. Tien Pao was amazed. There was a path up the craggy rock, but in the dark he'd missed it. The two soldiers slithered and groped their way down the steep path on their hard shoes. Tien Pao looked down at Glory of the Republic. The green wrapper of the queer candy lay at his feet. He stooped to pick it up. A lonely, starved, lost feeling welled up in Tien Pao. The hunger hit so fiercely. It must be that the strange candy in his stomach had awakened all his terrible hunger. It had put his stomach on fire. He was sick all over with hunger. Tien Pao dropped the green wrapper, picked up Glory of the Republic, and silently started down after the descending soldiers. He was sick, dizzy. Big ballooning blotches swept up before his eyes again. He had sense enough to drop down on his hands and knees on the steep path, to keep from falling headlong down the towering rock. He heard himself make a queer noise, and then he blacked out. When Tien Pao came to again, one of the soldiers was holding him in big steady arms, carrying him down the steep path. It felt good to be held. Tien Pao just wanted to lie back, shut his eyes. But where was Glory of the Republic? He must not be left behind. Tien Pao made sounds. He motioned. Then he saw that the other man was coming on behind, carrying Glory of the Republic. He closed his eyes. It was good to let go with the huge arms holding him. He'd slept all day, but he was so terribly sleepy. When Tien Pao opened his eyes again, the men were taking him down a dirt road.
there was a little open carriage standing at the side of the road. The soldier put Glory of the Republic down and sat in the carriage behind a wheel. Okay. I think that's probably a good place to stop for a while. But more later.